Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Mark Turner decided to leave the office a little earlier that day. It was just to grab lunch, something quick, maybe Italian takeout to eat in peace while reviewing some contracts. He needed a break in the middle of his hectic routine. The restaurant he chose was familiar, usually filled with local families and occasionally politicians or businesspeople he'd personally represented as a lawyer. He walked in without rushing, checked his phone, and placed his usual order. While waiting to be called, he glanced around without any real expectation. That's when everything changed. In the corner booth, partly hidden by a decorative partition, Mark saw someone he recognized. The woman was smiling broadly, eyes locked on her companion, a well-dressed man whispering something in her ear. Mark frowned as he recognized her face. It was Rachel, his sister-in-law. Married to Jason, his best friend since college, his law firm partner, practically a brother. The man beside her took a few seconds to identify. When he turned his face toward the light, Mark froze. It was Greg Harrison, a local businessman known for his image as a good father, exemplary husband, involved in religious and political campaigns around town. And, above all, married. Mark tried to rationalize the scene. Maybe it was just a business lunch, though the physical closeness between them contradicted that possibility. They were seated side by side, bodies leaning in, exchanging intimate smiles and lingering glances. Greg casually ran his hand along Rachel's arm, and she responded by touching his leg under the table. That wasn't friendship. That wasn't professional courtesy. It was a secret rendezvous. It was betrayal. Mark's heart raced. His first instinct was moral, he needed to tell Jason. But at the same time, he questioned whether it was even his business. The more he watched, though, the clearer it became that this wasn't a one-time slip. The connection between them seemed old, routine. He couldn't tell how long it had been going on, but it was obvious there was history there. And the betrayal was against Jason, someone who trusted Mark completely. That's what made him grab his phone and call immediately. He needed to tell him. His finger slid to his friend's name and pressed the call button. The phone rang twice. Mark adjusted himself, eyes still fixed on the scene. Suddenly, the conversation between Rachel and Greg was interrupted. Mark's eyes widened, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Claire, his wife, appeared smiling, as if arriving at a prearranged meeting. She greeted Greg with a kiss on the cheek and Rachel with a warm hug. She sat down at the table as if everything were perfectly normal. 3 people now shared the table of betrayal. 3 people he knew intimately. The call to Jason went to voicemail. Mark didn't bother calling back. He felt betrayed in a deeper way. Claire not only knew about her sister's affair, she was actively participating in the charade. There she was, laughing, pouring wine, covering everything up. Why would she do that? They'd always stood for honesty above all else, even with their kids. And now she was sitting right there, smiling, complicit, tangled in a web of lies. Mark didn't approach them. He stepped back, moving to a spot where he could watch without being seen. He recorded everything with his phone. He wasn't exactly sure why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe desperation. Or maybe a need to preserve evidence for when the truth finally came out. He captured Greg's intimate gesture of brushing Rachel's hair. He recorded Claire glancing around, making sure no one was paying attention. He filmed the silent toast among the 3 of them, their smiles full of secrets. He left the restaurant with his stomach churning. His appetite was gone. He drove to a more distant parking lot and sat there alone, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. The pain didn't come only from Rachel's betrayal. Or Greg's hypocrisy. It came from Claire's silence. From the fact that she'd hidden this from him. That she'd left home saying she was visiting her mother, when in reality, she was heading to a secret meeting with an adulteress and a married man. It came from broken trust. Mark was a discreet but firm man. He'd always been known as someone who kept his word. That's why what hurt the most was the rupture of the unspoken pact between him and Claire, the pact of truth. That complicity, built over nearly 2 decades of marriage, was now shattered. He wondered if Claire had done this before, if there were other secrets, other omissions. He thought about their kids. He thought about Jason. That same afternoon, he returned to the office without saying a word. Jason was in a meeting, and Mark preferred to wait. He needed to think, needed time. But the video remained on his phone, like a ghost waiting to be unleashed. And inside him, one question repeated itself like a hammer: how far does silence go when the truth demands to be spoken? Jason was still in his meeting when Mark returned to the office. He locked himself in his own office, turned on his computer, and tried to resume his daily tasks, but his concentration was gone. The documents might as well have been written in another language. Every time he blinked, he saw Claire sitting beside Rachel and Greg. His head felt heavy. His body did too. When he heard Jason's office door slam shut, he knew he couldn't delay any longer. He stood up and walked over. He was ready to tell him everything, straight up. He already had the video prepared to show. Before Jason could start any conversation, Mark asked him to sit down. He was serious, visibly uncomfortable. He took a deep breath, pulled his phone from his pocket, and placed it on the table, but before showing anything, he spoke firmly. He said he'd witnessed something he couldn't ignore. That he'd been having lunch at a restaurant and saw Rachel with another man. He told him everything clearly, without embellishment, trying to keep his composure as he watched Jason's expression change with every sentence. Jason sat silently for a few seconds, just listening, until he asked who the man was. When Mark answered it was Greg Harrison, Jason's eyes widened. Anger didn't come right away. First came a heavy, almost disbelieving silence. He shook his head, as if trying to deny it internally. Then he asked to see the video. Mark showed it. The video was clear, the touches, the intimate smiles, the obvious complicity. Jason stood up from his chair without saying a word. He simply said he needed to go. Mark tried to stop him, warning that he was too shaken, that it was better to think before acting. But Jason had already made up his mind. Jason decided to go to the restaurant. When he arrived, he saw it with his own eyes, Rachel with Greg, laughing, touching each other, acting as if nothing else in the world existed. His reaction was immediate. He lunged at Greg. He didn't care about the stares around him. The punch he threw was direct, without hesitation. Greg fell off his chair. Chaos erupted, people screamed. Rachel tried to intervene, but Jason pushed her away firmly. Security was called. Customers gathered, filming the scene with their phones. Jason showed the video on his own device to justify what he'd done. He didn't run, didn't hide. He stated exactly what was happening and why he reacted that way. Greg tried to say something, but he couldn't maintain his image in the face of the evidence. Jason left the restaurant carrying a mix of anger, shame, and pain. And Mark, who had mustered the courage to tell the truth, knew that moment marked the beginning of a rupture, not just in his friend's marriage, but also in his own home. Because now the truth was exposed, and with it, everything that had been hidden for so long. That night, Claire walked into the house in silence, knowing there was no more pretending. She'd witnessed everything at the restaurant. She saw Jason explode, saw Greg on the floor, saw the shock on Rachel's face. And she also saw Mark, standing at a distance, holding his phone, recording everything. She knew he'd seen her. And still, she came home without knowing what to say. Mark was waiting in the living room. No questions, no pretense. Just a tense silence that spoke louder than any words. Claire tried to break the ice, saying things had gotten out of control, that she never imagined Jason would react that way, that the plan was just to talk, to convince Rachel to end it. But Mark stopped her with a gesture. He said he didn't want excuses. He wanted to know how long she'd been lying to him. Claire sat down, hands trembling. She said she was trying to protect her sister, that she thought she was doing the right thing. That Rachel had promised it was just one meeting, that she needed to vent to someone. That Greg was nothing more than an escape valve. Her words came out confused, desperate. Mark just watched her. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed exhausted. He asked her why she hid it from the kids. Why she made up that she was visiting her mother, why she concealed the trip to the restaurant, why she got involved in something so dirty without even consulting her husband. Claire said she was afraid. Afraid of disappointing, afraid of destroying Rachel's image, afraid of starting a war between the families. She said she thought she could control the situation, that it would just be a conversation, that no one would find out. But she knew all of that wasn't enough. Mark stood up, walked to the hallway, and returned with his phone. He placed the device on the table and hit play on the video. Claire lowered her eyes. Hearing her own laughter in the background, seeing the complicity between her, Rachel, and Greg captured in just a few minutes, was more painful than she'd imagined. She begged him to delete it, said it would only bring more suffering. But Mark refused. He said the video was the only true thing amid so many lies. The conversation ended without shouting, without slamming doors, without drama. But the silence that filled the house afterward was the cruelest of all. Mark stood up, grabbed a blanket, and slept on the couch. Claire remained seated there, staring into the void, feeling the weight of guilt on her shoulders. Their marriage hadn't collapsed in a single day, but in that moment, it was clear something had broken for good. And maybe, even if they still lived under the same roof, they were already living separate lives. The following days were heavy. Mark started sleeping in the guest room. Conversations with Claire became brief, almost mechanical. The kids began to notice. Lucas, the older one, stayed quiet. Anna, more sensitive, cried at the slightest thing. Mark tried to keep up the routine, but it was impossible to ignore the tension. Meals were silent. Their eyes avoided meeting. At the office, Jason was acting strange. He said he had things to sort out at home. He avoided talking about Rachel. Mark respected his space, but he felt increasingly distant from everything. Until one night, when he got home from work, Claire was waiting for him in the living room. She said she'd talked to Rachel, that her sister had confessed everything to Jason. She also said he'd forgiven her. That they were trying to rebuild. Mark listened with his stomach turning. He thought about how different things could have been if Claire had been honest from the start. But she chose secrecy. She chose to protect a lie instead of trusting her husband. And now she expected understanding, as if everything could be fixed with a conversation. Lucas noticed the strange atmosphere at home long before any explanation came. Meals had lost their chatter, his parents avoided looking at each other, and the routine felt broken. One night, while Mark was finishing his coffee in the kitchen, Lucas approached and asked directly what was going on. Mark didn't have the heart to lie. He said he'd discovered something serious involving family members and that he was processing it carefully. Lucas pressed further, not out of youthful curiosity, but because he felt that silent tension was affecting everyone, including his sister. Mark sat beside his son and explained, as gently as possible, that Rachel had gotten involved with another man and that Claire knew. He told him about the restaurant, the video, Jason's punch, and how everything had fallen apart afterward. Lucas listened silently. His face grew serious, his eyes watery. He said he understood why his father was hurt and that he, too, felt betrayed. Mark asked him to be discreet, but Lucas had already decided Anna needed to know. The next morning, during breakfast, Anna dropped her spoon on her plate and said, quietly, that she thought what her mother had done was disgusting. Claire, who'd been trying to act as if the world hadn't collapsed, froze. She looked at her daughter, unsure how to react. Anna said she couldn't understand how a mother who always talked about respect, trust, and family had hidden an affair like that. She asked why her mother defended her aunt's betrayal, why she deceived everyone while pretending to be the example at home. Claire tried to speak but had no strength. Lucas stepped in. He said he'd already talked to his father, that he knew about the recording, that he was disappointed. He said the worst part was realizing his mother had chosen silence when she could have prevented everything. Claire took a deep breath and admitted she'd made a mistake. She said she thought she was protecting her sister, but now she saw she'd destroyed trust within her own home. After breakfast, Claire left without saying where she was going. She spent the day in silence, turned off her phone, and drove to Rachel's house. When she arrived, she found her sister alone, eyes swollen. Rachel said Jason had decided to forgive her. That although they were in crisis, he'd chosen to try rebuilding their relationship. Claire was shocked. She asked how that was possible after everything. Rachel replied that Jason said he'd rather face the pain of the truth than live a life built on lies. That phrase echoed in Claire's mind for hours. She realized that in trying to protect someone, she'd lost what mattered most, the trust of her children and her husband. She'd had the chance to tell the truth from the start but chose the easier path. She made excuses, manipulated situations, all to avoid confrontation. Now, with her marriage in ruins, she felt it might be too late to fix things. The next morning, Claire stayed alone in her room for over an hour. She reread old messages, looked at family photos, watched simple videos of happy moments. She tried to find strength in memories that now felt distant. She decided she needed to act differently. Avoiding pain wouldn't help anymore. It was time to face it. She walked downstairs without saying anything and left again. She bought flowers, not as a cliché, but because she knew Mark always brought her flowers on important dates. She picked out the light blue dress he'd always complimented. It was the same one she'd worn the day Mark proposed. She understood the symbolic weight of the gesture. She arrived home in the late afternoon. Asked the kids to stay in the living room. Called for Mark. When he appeared, looking tired, she knelt down. No one spoke right away. Claire, tears in her eyes, said she didn't expect to be forgiven. That she deserved the pain she was feeling. That she'd wronged everyone, especially herself. She said betrayal isn't just sleeping with someone else. Betrayal exists in silence, in complicity, in cowardice. She apologized for lying, for thinking she was protecting someone when, in reality, she was just running away. Lucas looked at his father. Anna cried silently, holding her mother's hand. Claire asked them not to do this out of pity. She just wanted them to know she was truly sorry and willing to face any consequence. She said she had no pride left, shame had taken its place. And she was only there because she still loved this family more than anything else in the world. Mark stood there for a while, unsure what to do. He looked at his kids. He thought about everything he'd been through in the past few weeks. He thought about the advice he gave other couples. He'd always said forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing to start over, even when the wounds are still open. He didn't answer right then. He picked up the flowers she'd left on the floor and placed them on the table. He asked everyone to have dinner together that night. Dinner was simple, quiet, but for the first time in days, there was something in the air that felt like hope. The road ahead would be long, filled with difficult conversations and lingering distrust. But there was a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning is all you need to rebuild. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.